Thank you so much. Aloha, talofa. I'm so pleased to be here with you here today. My name is Lormona Meredith. I'm the director of the community programs here at the Hawaii Workforce Funders Collaborative. I'm here with our executive director, Matt Stevens, who pretty much will be driving and leading our presentation and our content for today. But I also wanted to give you a little bit of context about our organization. We're a nonprofit organization committed to helping Hawaii's residents access quality, future-ready career pathways that provide a family-sustainable wage. We also conduct research and workforce development programs and help to elevate initiatives that are here in Hawaii, while at the same time also inviting opportunities to co-share and learn what folks are doing here in our INA and then also abroad to increase our learning opportunity and also retain talent here in Hawaii. And these are a picture of our core funding organizations, but we're also a collaborative that is growing and developing as we grow as well. A part of our organization, we also have what we call is the Hawaii Worker Equity Lab, which is primarily the space I lead. In the lab, we have a workforce webinar series where we try to create a community of practice and also learning about other initiatives that are going on in the state of Hawaii, but also from our partners across the nation. We have a dedicated workforce here in Hawaii and also agencies and partners that are really dedicated to uplifting worker voice. And we do that through a variety of different practices and tools. So we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to collaborate with you. So if you're interested in partnering, please reach out when you can. But yeah, so right now I'm going to turn the time. I know we have a lot to cover. We just recently launched our inaugural report about the workforce landscape here in Hawaii and data insights and research that were gathered from a variety of different sources. And I'm pleased to turn the time over to our executive director, Matt Stevens, who will be presenting that today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mona. And thanks everybody for being here today. It's great to see so many familiar faces, many of you all partners in the education and workforce space. Many people I've had lots of conversations with over the past couple of years while we've been standing up this Workforce Funders Collaborative. And really it was, what I learned from each of you, from our conversations, from, data analysis that we've done, from looking at a variety of reports that partners across the state have been running to really understand, what is the state of our workforce? What is that workforce challenge that we're all trying to solve? I think one thing that I put my finger on, I think, as I was trying to build this report is really that one thing that makes the workforce conversation so complicated, because I know any of us working in the space know that it is, right? Is that when you say, how are we going to solve Hawaii's workforce challenge? There are actually a lot of workforce challenges, and depending on who you're talking to, they may have a different workforce challenge. Employers struggle to find enough workers to fill the many open vacant positions that they have, which, our higher education system has a workforce challenge in ensuring that their graduates can get good jobs out of graduation. And workers and learners face a challenge of being able to find a good job that meets their needs and allows for them to have enough to be able to remain in Hawaii. And so our goal in really doing this report and doing this research was to ask, how could we align, well, everyone's workforce challenge is important. We really need a single workforce challenge that we're all going to come around. And I think it's this idea that if we don't create good opportunities for our next generation of workforce and they're not able to remain in Hawaii, everyone's workforce challenge is going to get worse. And so we went into this research with the hypothesis of what is the future look like for our next generation of workforce. And so, we're going to share a lot of information, but really three themes that I hope you all kind of can take as we go into this is really, curiosity over certainty. There's a lot of unknowns. And if we can be curious about what the future might look like, we can really, our second theme, collaboration, right? How can we work together with this curiosity to understand how we might get to a better future that we all agree on once we better understand the challenges we face. And finally, the third is really imagination, right? How could we collaborate to design new imaginative solutions together? So that's kind of like kind of ground this conversation. We knew we wanted to build this report about 6 months ago, and as I said, I really sat down and read a lot of reports and did some data analysis. But this was the question that really came to mind for me: is with all of the stakeholders across our system, measure program outcomes, right? We give a grant, we want to know the outcome. We want to know did the intervention work, right? We might track things like completion rates. We can assess individual success stories. But how do we, all of us together, how do we ask, is the system as a whole truly working for the people that it's meant to serve? Um, what if instead of measuring the system itself, right? I mean, that's part of how we start this, right? We do need to know there are checkpoints along the way of a career pathway, and we want to know that people are progressing down that pathway. But instead of just measuring the system itself, what if we measured whether people are actually getting what they need from it? Are individuals able to move seamlessly from education to a good job, or are they falling off track somewhere? And maybe some people are getting through and others aren't. How can we understand and really make sure that everybody in our state has access to a good job? And so, really, that led us to ask, is the system actually working for people? Are individuals able to successfully navigate education, training, and employment without unnecessary barriers? And really, this big goal of what would it take to ensure that 100% of our Hawaii residents entering the workforce are able to have access to a quality job in the next 10 years? That's a big goal. And I'll be the first to admit that we don't have the data today to fully answer this question. We're going to share a lot of data, but just because we don't have the data doesn't mean we shouldn't ask the question. So we set out to use the data we do have to really assess the likelihood that this will be true 10 years from now. The goal is really to push ourselves to ask, what would we need, what we all need to do differently to be able to answer this question? And not only answer the question, to really like the answer we get, right? To be clear that we're able to do that. And so the goals of us putting this report together were really, one, to unite stakeholders all across Hawaii, folks like you in the room and all those folks that we work with, right, around a shared workforce challenge with the goal of kind of inspiring collective investment to be able to address it through aligned efforts. The report is meaty. If you've had a chance to read it or skim through it, it is 63 pages. And so one of the goals was to provide a comprehensive report that could be used as a reference and as a resource by multiple stakeholders. You'll see there's a whole 30 pages in the back of it, if you've had a chance to look at it, that really do talk about things that each stakeholder can do. And we're going to talk more about that. We wanted to use data-backed storytelling to articulate those systemic workforce challenges, the opportunities, and what possible solutions might look like. And so that's really, how can we use data to understand where we are, but how can we use storytelling and things like user personas to really understand the human element and make sure we're measuring the right things that are going to benefit people in the way that they're looking for. And then finally, we wanted to be able to have a resource to educate legislators, county level policymakers, and anyone who wants to advocate for priority workforce issues and solutions. So that's what we intended. And really, I would really push folks, if you've had a chance to look at the report, it is a report, but we see it also as a roadmap for action. It highlights gaps, but more importantly, I think it lays out what we can do together. And there really is a role for everyone. You're going to hear me say that a lot today. No matter who you are, no matter where you are, we're all a part of the workforce. And we all play a role in helping the next generation of workforce, whether that's because we're training people directly, because we're parents of children who are entering the workforce, because we're employers. Really, we all wear at least a couple of hats in this equation. So, this report is meant to be used and not just read. And so the goals for our webinar today is really, one, to dig into the story of the report. We're going to ease our way in, kind of outline the crisis, invite people to join us in some of that discomfort of the complexity of the challenge we face. But then we're going to devote 30 minutes to a hands-on activity. And 30 minutes is not a lot of time to solve complex workforce issues. And so, but it's going to be a good chance to really have a chance to work together in breakout rooms to pick up and put down the report and really try to collectively think through how we might solve some of these workforce challenges together. We're going to practice using that report as a tool for change in that. And then finally, what I hope we can accomplish, we'll have a Google form at the end to reach out to us. But really, we hope that today we can build new relationships and commitments and really answer this question for ourselves and together of how we might work differently to help reach this big workforce goal together. And so with that, let's dive into the report itself. And so I'll tell the story of the report, but I'll kind of also do a little bit of the narrator, right? Of if you were to open the 63-page report that you'll find on our website, the first 11 pages or so really outline what we think is worth naming as a crisis. Similar to climate change, right? There is this sort of existential crisis that if we do not take action, short-term actions and some long-term actions to change what we're seeing in the data right now, we really do run the risk that many of the next generation of workforce may have to leave Hawaii. And so that's really what we want to ground people in that reality and that discomfort as a starting point so that we can figure out, well, what would we need to do to change this? So if we look at census data, we're not even looking at who's enrolled in public school or private school or charter schools. We're just looking at census data at kids who will turn 18 over the next decade. We have roughly 167,000 young residents in our state. We then looked at DLIR projections of job openings over that same time period. And so that's new job openings, but that's also how many people are leaving the workforce and creating a new opening. And we looked at what is the projected wage for these industries where we expect to see these job openings. And so right off the bat, there's this number that we'll reference quite a bit throughout the report that for those 167,000 youth entering the workforce over the next decade, as of right now, our best guess is that there are roughly 120,000 projected job openings that pay a minimum living wage using that MIT living wage for a single adult of $56,000 a year. And so that shows that, roughly 28% of our new workforce will lack access to a living wage job as it currently stands. And additionally, there are 257,000 job openings we expect to see open up over that same time period that'll pay less than a living wage. And so there's some things we can do there as well, but we're really going to focus on those living wage jobs and how we can grow this piece of the pie bigger. We dug in a little bit to look at the industries where these living wage job openings exist. And I don't think there are any surprises here. These are many of the industries that our state is already investing in through projects like Good Jobs Hawaii, through the sector partnerships that our Chamber of Commerce and others are leading. Things like business, construction and skilled trades, education, healthcare, and transportation. But what makes this more complicated? About a year ago, we did some work with the Islander Institute because we know, first and foremost, a good job needs to pay enough to be able to live and thrive in Hawaii. We know we have the highest cost of living in the nation. We know that housing is limited and housing costs are through the roof. But, kind of this process we talk about a lot in this report is kind of flipping between qualitative data and quantitative data, right? We can measure how many jobs pay a living wage, but before we really dig in and measure how many good jobs we have, we talk to communities across the state working with the Islander Institute to really understand in people's own words, what makes a job a good job. And there were really three things. Yes, you do need to earn enough to be home in Hawaii, but really that wage is a means to an end, right? More money indefinitely doesn't necessarily mean a better and better job. It's really about having enough to meet your needs and to be able to remain in Hawaii and deepen your roots. The second part, what people expressed was a good job allows you to make a contribution. And so that could be enough pay that you can contribute to your family, but it could also mean that that good job doesn't take you an hour and a half away from home every day because you have role as a caregiver to your parents, to your kids. It could be that you want a job that contributes to the well-being of your community, right? Working for a nonprofit organization or any business with kind of a social cause that helps our communities. And finally, the third thing is that a good job allows a person to have and maintain good health. And that's both physical health, right? good, safe working conditions, but also good mental health. And so that's where things like workplace culture come in. And so there's a lot more work to do here to say how do we measure how many good jobs exist. And but I think the real takeaway for us is that a good job is a little bit subjective, and what a good job and for a person in one community might be different than a good job to someone somewhere else. And so just want to note that complexity, as that's one layer of what makes this crisis a little complicated. Another layer that complicates things is just the fact that we are an island state, right? And the opportunities and the challenges really do vary island by island and even community by community within an island. Um, we probably all know this, right? Most of our jobs in our state are on Oahu and concentrated in urban Honolulu. But what people don't often realize is that that changes what the opportunities are, right, for people on our neighbor islands. And so on Oahu, and this data was from October of this year, of this past year, we had zero point 0.7 job seekers in DLIR's HireNet system for every active job that was posted. So we have more job openings than job seekers, which I think employers on Oahu would say feels about what they're experiencing, right? Having a hard time finding people for jobs. But on our neighbor islands, it's actually the inverse, right? We have over 2 job seekers for every open job if we're just looking at job seekers and jobs for businesses on these neighbor islands. And so one thing we'll talk about is the opportunity for inter-island remote work, right? How can we make sure that people have access to good jobs regardless of where they live, and that they don't have to relocate from their community of their choice just to find a good job? One analogy I talk about a lot is thinking about how complicated our power grid is on an island state, right? We don't just have one grid. Our grids don't connect from island to island. So if we're generating more than enough power on Hawaii Island, where I live up in North Kohala, because we have these big wind turbines, right? And we have some unused power, we can't share that power with Oahu, right? Other than if we stored it on a Tesla battery, put it on a plane, and took that battery to another island, right? That wouldn't be a very useful way to share power from one place to another. And having to have our workforce, get on airplanes and fly from island to island every day isn't necessarily the most effective way. It wouldn't necessarily be a good job. So that's another layer of complexity. And so we name all of these layers of complexity not to say we can't solve this problem, but just to say that if we solve only one piece of this challenge, we're not going to solve the overall challenge. It's really going to take understanding these different layers of challenges that workers in our state face, that employers in our state face, and that really we as a workforce and as an economy face, right? And depending on who you are, where you live, and what industry you're in, you may face a different combination of these challenges. And so somewhere around page 9 in the report, we really dig into and talk about each of these layers. And so the data kind of outlined the first 4 of these, but there's some data points I could share about the other 2 as well, right? Job availability is just talking about overall, do we have enough jobs for everyone in the state? That's kind of the basic thing. We need to make sure we get that right. In terms of job quality, do we have enough jobs that meet the broader standards for a good job? And how does that vary from community to community? Do people up where I live in North Kohala, do we have access to quality jobs at the same rate that someone in Kona might? How might we measure that? How might we map that? And how might we use that information to start to design solutions? Right? We have these geographic disparities. Once we start to map how job quality varies from island to island, community to community, how can we start to address that and design solutions that meet the needs of our different communities and our different geographies? Training misalignment is really talking about, how do we make sure that folks entering the workforce have the skills for the jobs that are open today? So the sector partnerships work that I mentioned before really brings employers and the training providers at our community colleges to the table to have those conversations and making sure that we're creating the certification and the programs and the degrees that are going to help. But as we think about the need to create more good jobs, we think about the way in which technology, artificial intelligence, economic development may allow us to grow more good jobs. If we get really good at growing more good jobs, ideally we would grow those good jobs quicker. AI and technology will change what skills might be needed in the workplace at a more rapid pace over the next 10 years. And so when we talk about training misalignments, we don't just want to make sure that we know this, how we can help people get the skills of today, but that we have an ongoing process, right? That we can get faster and faster, that as the skills needed for jobs change, that signal is getting signaled back to our colleges, to our K-12 educators, and making sure that, you know, we're training kids early as new skills are emerging and that we really have a good way of knowing what. Systemic stress is really about those economic pressures that our workforce face, right? If folks are having to work two jobs or have limited access to childcare, it's making going to those jobs harder, right? If they don't have sufficient mental health supports, because we have actually sector specific shortages in our mental health space, right? Where we're lacking, um, you know, hundreds of unfilled mental health positions in our state. And so you can see the interconnectedness of these challenges, right? If we don't have enough childcare workers, then workers aren't going to have childcare. And we all know this, right? But being able to name this and name these challenge layers. And then as we go through the report, we talk about interventions that are working and we say which of these layers they address. Uh, and what are some recommendations of things we can try so that we could all see that the interconnected work that we're doing together are the things that we need to start to untangle these challenge layers, right? And so that's kind of complicated to talk about. I struggled my way through that slide, waved my fingers around a lot. But one thing that I think we do pretty well in the report, and would encourage you to look at, is we use these workforce personas. And these personas were actually generated by some work that DBET did a couple of years ago during the pandemic, where they had conversations with individuals all over the state and really tried to identify some clusters or some archetypes or some personas, right? What are some common themes of individuals who are facing common challenges to the pandemic? And they developed these personas. They gave them, a description of like, and they gave them kind of a fake name. But they also opened them up kind of open source to let folks like us use them. And so we went through the personas that they developed, and then we worked through these challenge layers that the data told us exist in Hawaii and really told the story of, okay, if I am a single mom in my late 30s on a neighbor island who lost my retail job during COVID, what might be those layers of struggle that I might face? How might that make it harder? And how might those challenges compound on one another? And ultimately, we tell the story of three different workers who, if we do not address these layers, will be forced to leave our state potentially. And then we go on to talk about what's the systemic challenge of that, right? As each one of these workers leaves, there's a negative feedback loop, right? If a worker has to leave due to low wages, then their departure is going to reduce the workforce capacity at their employer, right? And the folks that are there are going to have to work harder or longer hours or be short staffed, which creates more stress, right? And if we have that systemic stress, it's just going to make that challenge harder. I'm not going to go too deeply into this because I think we all know what this looks like and feels like. But our hope is that by being able to name the challenges our workers are facing, the clients we're serving, and our organizations are facing in this layer, we can sit with that discomfort and start to, rather than, try to get that low hanging fruit of what are those easy solutions, which it's important to make progress, right? We can really dig in and start to create a longer term plan for what are those investments we need to make over the next 3 years to be able to start to untangle these complicated workforce challenge layers. And then on top of that, what are the bigger investments we're going to need to make and start thinking about now over maybe years 3 through 10 if we hope to be able to turn things around and hit that goal of being able to ensure that everybody has access to a good job in the next 10 years. And so really, our call to action from this is that this cycle we described really represents an urgent challenge, and that we believe that without bold and strategic action that we outlined through the rest of the report, that we really could risk losing the next generation of workforce before they even enter their career. So that's really the crisis side of this, but we see this as an opportunity. And this is really where the roadmap comes in. There was some great work done, in 2020 that really brought a lot of stakeholders together around a report called the Talent Roadmap. And we looked at some of the recommendations coming out of that, and we could highlight some great initiatives that over the past 5 years have made some huge progress. That if we didn't have these foundational programs, we would be in much worse shape than we're in. And we want to lift these up and really build upon them. And so those kind of successes we've seen over the past 5 years are, as I mentioned, sector partnership expansion. Um, we've had sector partnerships in technology, clean energy and skilled trades, creative industries, that all came about through the Good Jobs Hawaii project that our UH system received a federal grant. We've also seen aquaculture and natural resources. We've seen some innovation in the healthcare space. The Healthcare Association of Hawaii developed what they call a glide path, which I think is a really great innovative example of how we start to untangle some of these complicated interrelated workforce challenges that I mentioned, right? And that's where, people who are in a CNA, kind of an entry level healthcare position, can actually earn and learn, right? They can go back to school, they can be getting the certification they need to move up into an LPN position without having to stop working entirely, right? They can continue because a lot of people can't afford to do that, right? The decision to stop working entirely to upskill is a big and challenging thing. And so we'd love to see more of these earn and learn glide paths in other industries. We've seen a tremendous growth in work-based learning. Hawaii P20 has built a successful work-based learning intermediary network where nonprofit organizations and other organizations are receiving grants to serve as these intermediaries between our K-12 system and our employers to set up these work-based learning opportunities that allow employers to get into the classroom and provide our young learners with opportunities to explore what good jobs are out there, what careers might they be interested in, and really gain exposure to what a pathway might look like to end up in that position in the future. And these intermediaries are really important because we know our employers are already really busy, and we know our educators are really busy. And so these organizations do a lot of that legwork to really expedite and make these opportunities available. We also have Climb High Bridge, which is a really great organization and platform that uses technology to allow employers to kind of have a one-stop shop to show up and kind of make themselves available to educators. And so I think both of these initiatives have been really promising practices that we're excited about seeing how they can expand over the next few years. Additionally, to speak to those geographic disparities, we worked with Vibrant Hawaii, a nonprofit organization here on Hawaii Island, and funded them to do a research project where they spoke to students all across Hawaii Island to really understand how might this work-based learning intermediary need be different on a large kind of spread out island, right? Where many of our communities are rural and where our employers and our future workforce may be in different areas. And so they spoke to about 1,300 students, they spoke to educators, they spoke to employers, and there's a link to that report on our website. I'd encourage you to check it out to really design what a work-based learning intermediary network might look like on Hawaii Island. And I'm excited to say that they were actually able to receive a grant from P20, and that has just kicked off this past month. And they've been able to design something that needs students on Hawaii Island. And so we want to lift up, how can we uncover promising workforce practices, but then how can we use community voice and worker voice like Vibrant Hawaii did with their report to really customize and meet the needs. And so scaling doesn't just look like making a successful initiative bigger. It looks like how do we adapt it to meet the needs, because really meeting our goal of ensuring 100% of our workforce has access to a good job means that we're not talking about one size fits all solutions, right? It's really being able to qualitatively identify the needs, qualitatively understand what success might look like for every worker, for every community, and then being able to design and implement solutions. And then finally, the last promising practice is really around the creation of a state unified plan. Our Workforce Development Council has done some incredible work over the past year to invite stakeholders from across the public sector, private sector, nonprofit sector, and philanthropy to really collaborate on a unified plan. They're required by law to submit a plan to the Department of Labor every 4 years that outlines how they'll spend federal workforce dollars. And I would just say they've done such a tremendous job ensuring that there are multiple voices at the table and acknowledgement, right, that the big kind of challenges we face are going to require collaborative solutions, um, deliberate conversations around workforce equity, and really that workforce synergy where different stakeholders are working together to design and develop solutions. So those are things that are working really well. Then the report goes into 5 key recommendation areas that really build upon the successes we've seen. And those are, first, let's continue to expand our work-based learning to all schools and all communities. We've seen great progress, and how can we continue to expand this to ensure that everybody has opportunities early in their education career to understand, one, that these new good jobs we're talking about creating do in fact exist, that they can see themselves in the job, and that they understand what it would take to get that job. Second, we want to invest in the expansion and the enhancement of sector based strategies. Those are those sector partnerships we're talking about. But also, how can we really work to ensure that workforce development and economic development are going hand in hand? I think the clean energy sector is a great example, right? Where we know we have a statewide goal of being 100% renewable energy by 2045, and that's going to involve some big investments in growing out our clean energy sector. But oftentimes we hear that the speed that we grow that economic development is really limited by whether we think we have the local workforce to do that, because we don't want to necessarily have to import workforce from out of state that might exacerbate a lot of those cost of living challenges we're already facing with limited housing and things like that. And so how can, if we can see that we have data about kids coming through, eighth grade, ninth grade, 10th grade, who are really interested in clean energy jobs and doing internships and things like that, how can we use that data to show the industry that, hey, we've got a wave of, X thousand kids who are excited and see themselves contributing to a cleaner and greener future for Hawaii, and allows that economic development to happen a little bit faster, right? And so we talk about a lot of things that can happen, right? But really involve engaging with businesses in those sectors to build those relationships and ensure we can grow those solutions. Finally, or not finally, next, we want to develop lifelong learning and reskilling for those emerging sectors, right? We know that over the past year, many of us have seen AI, change how we approach our day-to-day jobs. We're still kind of in that experimental phase where maybe a year ago we were like, hey, what would happen if I used AI to, sift through this really big report someone sent me? But now we're, a year later, we're kind of openly using it. It's integrated in a lot more of the tools that we're using. But it remains unseen really what the impacts are going to be. But I think it's safe to say that no matter where we are in our career, we're going to be lifelong learners, because the technology is going to change what we can do in our jobs and how we do a lot of our jobs. And so we need to think about lifelong learning and reskilling to support the emerging sectors, right? And that means ways in which we talk about skills-based hiring. We talk about being able to, build credentials throughout our career and be able to signal those to employers. And because these pathways may get more complicated, we really need to strengthen career counseling and navigation support. Um, how can we make sure that our youth have opportunities within our schools, but also within the community organizations they may already be working with, within trusted adults they already know, right? Maybe a sports coach, maybe a family friend, right? Making sure that these adults that our kids are listening to have the right data, the right information, and the right resources to steer kids in the right direction. And so it's really a no wrong door approach, right? To making sure that there are a multitude of career counselors and navigational supports, be that a website or a person, that as our economy and workforce emerge, we're able to get that information into the hands and support people on their journeys. And then finally, continuing to support unified workforce strategies. And that's really codifying the state unified plan into law, being able to name a big North Star goal. We're kind of proposing as a straw man, what would it look like for 100% of our youth entering the workforce in the next decade to have access to a good job? Is that something the state could codify into law, just like our clean energy goal? And how might having that common goal, being able to elevate, keeping our kids in Hawaii through economic resilience as a policy priority, um, how might that change how we design and do a lot of our work? And so when we think about this, there really is a role for everybody. And that's what kind of the final 35 pages of the report. I think of it more as an appendix and as a resource, but also as the start of a conversation. We looked at the recommendations we were making as a sector to say, hey, here's the stuff we think might be needed statewide over the next 10 years. And then stakeholder by stakeholder, we talked to folks in our networks and we put on our hats and tried to empathize and anticipate, well, if we need to, you know, increase remote learning opportunities, what might be the role that a community organization might play in being able to ensure that people in their community have access, things like digital literacy training and things like that. And so you'll see some overlap when you read through it, right? Many of the same solutions will be being named from different perspectives. But I think it's important, right, that we've really raised that the good work we're doing, we really need more collaboration, right? It's really going to take us all doing what we do best to really be able to lift up these solutions. And so I'm not going to go through all of those. I think our activity is really going to give us a chance to pick up that report and kind of skim through it and look at some of these report recommendations. But more than anything, I just wanted to show the format, right? Within each stakeholder in that appendix, we talk about short-term actions, and those are things that we feel like the foundation is there, right? We might be able to take action over the next 3 years. And what recommendation are we making? And if we were to succeed in implementing that recommendation, which of those workforce challenge layers might get untangled? Because again, we have this big kind of workforce challenge, this tangled set of Christmas lights, and we want to take a really deliberate way to help each stakeholder identify kind of their role without tightening that knot worse, right? Then we talk about long-term actions, and these are things that, you know, there may be one or two kind of foundational things we need to do. And so we say, well, these may not be things that we can realistically implement for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 years. But we want to be identifying what those are now and thinking about them and having those cross sector, cross stakeholder conversations to really think about that. And so, one example, just as kind of as a straw man here, is like if we're talking about a long-term action for our higher education, how can we integrate workforce analytics into our curriculum planning and program development? Higher education institutions should be able to eventually have access to real-time data to adjust their programs, their courses, and their training initiatives to meet the evolving needs of the labor market. Because the last thing we want to do, right, is train somebody for a job that doesn't exist. And maybe that also, hey, suddenly there's this new AI job that didn't exist 3 years ago. But how many of those jobs are we seeing? Are there 30 jobs? Or are there 1,000 jobs? And so that's where we really need real-time workforce data. And that's not something that higher education can do themselves, right? That involves working with our public workforce system, working with legislators to unlock funding. There's a bill going through right now around how might we share and govern our data collectively to enable cross-agency data sharing. And so that's a short-term action that would need to happen to unlock this long-term action of making this workforce data used by our education systems and our employers to make educated real-time decisions. And so it's complicated, but what we hope is that the way we lay it out allows us to start to kind of take different threads, do some choose your own adventure, and kind of work our way through this. And so, as I said, there's a role for everybody. We talk about what employers can do, K-12, government agencies, nonprofit organizations, students and job seekers can really share their insights, right? Make sure that if we're creating opportunities to, incorporate community voice and student voice in how we're designing our public workforce system, that when we create these opportunities, that students are filling out those surveys, right? And again, it's a symbiotic relationship, right? Because oftentimes folks want to make sure the trust is there that if they're going to share their information, it's going to be used. And so I think that if we can start doing this right and start demonstrating this, we're going to build that shared trust and build that hope for how we create this better future together. There's opportunity for philanthropy, right, to be able to provide those that seed funding for initiatives that really address many of those wraparound services that workers need. Oftentimes um, training programs are really, might utilize federal dollars that just pay for training, or other funding sources that have very restricted funding. And so, are there opportunities to braid funding and to ensure that all of the layers, right, to these challenges are being unlocked? So that's a high level overview of the crisis, some of the opportunities that we see, and how you can use the report to kind of read through and understand what these opportunities look like. And really, now we want to pivot and do an activity together over the next half hour to go into breakout rooms and really think through, you know, how might we work together to do this. And so I'm going to share, we're going to share a link to the instructions for this activity. We're going to put folks into breakout rooms. I think that the chat gets a little tricky once we're in breakout rooms. So we have a link to the webinar page on our website that if you go to, Mona will share that in the chat in a second. If you click that link and go to the bottom, you'll find links to the activity instructions, to use case examples that you can pick to kind of work through this, a link to a mural board where you can actually use some post-it notes for your group to kind of capture what your group is talking about as you work through this together. But really the goal of this activity is to identify a use case, a single workforce challenge. And the prompt is really going to say, introduce yourselves to each other in the breakout room, what organization you work for, and your role at that organization. And ideally, if there's a challenge that somebody in the room is facing, a workforce challenge, sharing that and having the group work on that would be ideal. But we also have a document that has like 4 hypothetical kind of made up names, made up data scenarios, but very real challenges we face in our state, right? That can be used as well. And so the first step will be just to introduce yourselves and pick a workforce, what we call use case. And so I'm just going to very quickly walk through what the activity might look like. And the use case that I'm choosing as I kind of demonstrate this is thinking about Hawaii's construction workforce, right? We have a massive need for skilled construction workers due to ongoing housing and infrastructure projects. Our current workforce is aging, and we're not necessarily seeing enough young people entering the trades to help us be able to grow our housing and our infrastructure at the speed at which we would like. There are barriers, right? And so that's really the outline of what the challenge is. Step 1 is going to be decomposing the challenge into the different kind of minor workforce challenges that might comprise this. And the first step is really thinking about who are the stakeholders who are impacted by this challenge and being able to name what is their challenge. So construction companies have a challenge, job seekers and young workers on neighbor islands might have a challenge, unions and apprenticeship programs. You get a feel for what we're talking about here. Then the next step is really being able to go to page 9 from our report and familiarizing yourself with these workforce challenge layers as we talk about them. And so thinking about those workforce challenge layers, how do those relate to some of those stakeholders and the challenges you identified on the previous section, right? So, we might need more houses, but is workforce data projecting that construction companies are hiring on neighbor islands? Um, if we're not able to see that job availability, we may not know to grow that sector. So that's one example, right? But really, it's just about being curious, right? There's no right answer, there's no wrong answer, but it's really trying this on for size, being able to empathize with each of the stakeholders and start to articulate what those interrelated challenges might be. Then step 3 is being able to identify a way in which some of those might be interrelated, right? If we look at those challenges, could a couple of them kind of almost be a chicken or the egg problem, right? Where, well, if we can't workers aren't going to have childcare if we don't have childcare workers. But if the wages for childcare workers aren't higher, we're not going to be able to, attract people into childcare positions. That's an example, right, of sector-specific shortages and job quality, where those two things are interrelated. And so there's an opportunity to kind of spend 5 minutes working through how some of those layers might be related. Step 4 is thinking about, well, who might be in a position of influence to be able to make an immediate impact. And so consulting our role for everyone exercises um, on pages 36 through 63 to really think through, okay, who might be in a good position to take some short-term actions at resolving this and being able to articulate one or two of those. And then, and again, we only have 30 minutes, so it's totally fine if we don't get to step 5. But one thing we really like to think about is there's a lot of transferable solutions, right? If we can identify a short-term solution that works, a proven practice, right, that maybe increases digital literacy for a specific position, how might we be able to scale that short-term solution to unlock some bigger, solutions in other industries and other communities and other sectors? And so there's a place on our mural board to be able to think about those bigger solutions. And then finally, the last step in our activity is thinking through, okay, we've come up with some good solutions, but what might be needed from government, from employers, from our community colleges, from philanthropy in terms of funding, in terms of policies, or just in terms of cross-sector collaboration to actually unlock these solutions. So with that, and I'll just show, we're going to share the link to the mural boards. And if you haven't used Mural before, it's really just these digital Post-it notes. And so we're going to put you into breakout rooms, and there are different rows in this document for each group. So the first thing you're going to want to do is find the row for your breakout room based on your number. And then just zoom in, and you're going to move from left to right as you kind of go through these steps. We've got a document on our website that has all of the instructions if you want all of the information about what to do at each step. But really, we've tried to make it as simple as possible. Select a use case and use these Post-it notes to just collaboratively jot down some of those key details. Then move over to section 1 and identify who are the stakeholders who are affected and how might they be affected, right? Stakeholders across the top, impacts going down. So try to spend about 5 minutes per section. I understand it's going to be a pretty fast exercise. Get as far as you can. But really the goal today isn't, like I said, to solve these super complex challenges. It's to try on the report for size, to build relationships with the people in your breakout room, to go from challenge to opportunity, and really just get a chance to utilize the report, because it's a big report, right? And it's really meant to be used rather than simply read. When we come back together in about half an hour, we'll do a quick share outs and just hear how the activity went for people. Would love to come up with some of the solutions. We'd love to share out and hear. But we'll have a follow-up Google form at the end. And really, this activity is meant to be probably more of a 2 to 3 to half day activity that we would love to replicate either in person on Zoom with a set of stakeholders that you work with. And so again, our goal is to move fast. It's not to be perfect. It's to be curious. It's to use our imagination. It's to try some of this on for size. But we will have opportunities to engage further, and are really excited that you're here today with us, and excited to hear what you come up with. So with that, maybe Mona, we can start to assign folks to breakout rooms.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. Thank you, everyone. I know that was a lot of information. We have about 20 folks left for this section, so I have 4 breakout rooms and going to put you all there now. So you'll be.
Yeah, welcome back, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us in this experiment here. We had a good conversation in my breakout room, but I'd love to hear maybe from some of the other breakout rooms. Am I sharing my screen, or did I just present with?
No, go ahead. We don't see it yet.
There we go. I just went full screen. in my mind, that was all it took. Okay. All right. Can you see it now?
Yes.
We could do this a little bit more informally because I think it looked like folks just mainly had some informal conversations through some of the prompts. But I'd love to hear from one of the groups. Maybe just a quick kind of um, summary of maybe what you uncovered in your conversation. What were you able to select a use case that one of the members in your room was facing, workforce challenge, and would love to hear about it.
Our,
I'll,
our, oh, sorry, Kathleen, go ahead.
we were group 2, and we chose the job seekers and young workers in neighbor islands, interested in good jobs, but unsure about training. And a big factor is having enough jobs and education opportunities so that our children don't have to leave the islands and can continue to work here, find good jobs. That was kind of what we were striving for. And maybe our other groups members can add to that.
Yeah, did anybody else from that group, were there any examples of some great work that's already happening? Maybe some thoughts about how we might build upon that? All
I
right, gonna pull my slides up just for one more minute here as we close out. Really want to thank you all for all of the great conversations, for being here with us for the past 90 minutes. I know it was a lot of information and it's a big report, but more than anything, we hope this is the start of a conversation, right? We really want to collaborate with all of you. So our commitment coming out of this conversation, is that we would love to bring the report to your network. If there are a group of colleagues or a network of organizations you work with where it would make sense for us to, in person or on Zoom, do kind of a 30-minute presentation about the report, but then maybe some of the recommendations specific to your industry or sector or set of stakeholders, we'd be happy to do that. As I mentioned, we did a very fast run through of what kind of a couple hour, a half day activity could be to actually dig into some of these challenges together and think through how can we create solutions, right, that kind of fall outside the scope of any one person's job, what might be needed and how might we support those things. And so we'd be open to exploring the opportunity to run a half-day workshop to be able to gather some insights and build some relationships. We also, really commit to continue to evolve the report with you. We're going to update this report every year. This was kind of the what might the future look like if we don't like it, what might we need to do to end up in a better future. But really, we hope to every year put out an update on this. And I think by next year, I'd really love to be able to dig into how do we measure access to good jobs and how can we identify the communities and industries and populations facing specific barriers, right? There's a lot more work to do on that, and I think it's a critical aspect of this. But by the end of the year, when we update this, we want to be able to showcase early adopters. And so if there are examples from your daily work, things that kind of align with this, we'd love to highlight real examples in future webinars, blog posts, or case studies, right? Because we know that traditionally things are very industry based, right? But if we're taking this opposite approach, we're saying, what do our learners need? What do our communities need? If we fix something for healthcare, hey, we might be able to apply that somewhere else too, right? So can we take those early adopters and build those playbooks and get that information in front of other stakeholders to be able to make progress together? And then finally, we hope to track organizational commitments. And so, what that might look like is, would your organization be willing to pledge that this 10-year goal is important to you? Or is there something you're already doing or plan to do based on reading this report? We'd love to hear about it. And really, we want to keep the scoreboard, right? When we update this report, we want to say, hey, over the past year, working with people, we've come up with potentially 10,000 new, quality jobs that we didn't know about. And these are jobs that kids have visibility into. And so you can join us, that's what we hope to put forward, but, we really believe that 100% of job seekers should have access to quality jobs, and that we need to enable them to remain in Hawaii. We really need a pledge to take action now. And so we'd love to hear from you about how you might use this report or work with us. What commitments can your organization make today? And who else in your networks or your organization needs to be part of this conversation? We see ourselves as conveners. And so we want to bring people together. And so Mona will share the link to this Google form in the chat, but the QR code will also take you there. All of these resources are also going to be on our website in the webinar section afterwards. And so we'll just love to hear from you. Just in a quick 5-10 minute form to hear ways we may be able to keep in touch and continue this conversation.
Thank you
So
so
with that,
much, Matt. Yeah, I dropped the link in the chat for our survey form. We will be sending up a follow-up email with the resources shared, as well as some of the links of our partner initiatives that Matt had mentioned during his presentation. But we would love to learn more about the work that you do in your communities and how we can help highlight that, whether it's through our webinar series or other ways, as Matt mentioned. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and take care and be well.